Good evening, CavanKerry audience, and welcome to another installment of the CavanKerry Press virtual reading series. I am the Marketing Communications Director at CavanKerry Press, Dimitri Reyes, and it is my pleasure this evening to be bringing you two wonderful, wonderful authors. We have Tina Carlson, who is the friend and colleague of Denise Tolan, and Denise Tolan today, on launch day, will be reading from this beautiful, beautiful memoir, Italian Blood, made from us, CavanKerry Press. I definitely encourage all of you that doesn't have this book to get this book. If not to read this story, because this story is amazing, but to also feel this velvety cover. I always talk about how beautiful our covers are. It's so soft. They come with French flaps. They're just beautifully made. And I do encourage you all to pick something up like that today for 20% off. In the chat throughout the night, we're going to be putting coupons for all the books that are being read this evening, both from Denise Tolan and from Tina Carlson. Please, in the chat, either the social media coordinator or our director, please put those coupon codes in the chat. I believe it's CKP reading for this particular book, and all the books this evening that we will be promoting are 20% off. This one from CavanKerry Press and the two other from the University of New Mexico. Before we move on to our run of show tonight, which will consist of a reading from Tina Carlson and then a reading from the new memoir of Denise Tolan's Italian Blood, we are going to start with a land acknowledgement and also acknowledging Hispanic Heritage Month. And to do that, I am going to call upon our social media coordinator, the wonderful and brilliant Tamara Alclacy-Coleman.
Hi, y'all. So I am Tamara Alclacy-Coleman. But before I start my acknowledgement, I will be putting the Native Lands USA map into the chat if you want to find what native land you are occupying, and put that in the chat so we can all acknowledge and understand the lands that we are doing this on and gathering on. So my name is again, Tamara Alclacy-Coleman. I am the social media coordinator for CavanKerry Press. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the latest in CavanKerry series of virtual readings, celebrating our new and forthcoming releases. Before the reading begins, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey belongs to the Lenni Lenape people. We honor their history. We cannot function in our work as arts activists, nor offer a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. Additionally, we join arts organizations across the country in celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And of course, we honor the crucial role of Hispanic writers in poetry in articulating these very varied sociocultural landscapes of the world. We encourage each of you to support a more equitable and inclusive publishing industry by reading and celebrating poetry from all of these groups of people, not just this month, but always. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dimitri Reyes.
Thank you so much for that, Tamara. Okay, so the moment we've been waiting for, we're going to start divulging in some beautiful poetry this evening by Tina Carlson. And before we begin, I am going to actually read Tina Carlson's bio so you can know a little more about her. Tina Carlson is a New Mexico poet and a psychiatric nurse practitioner. Thank you for your service, specializing in perinatal mental health. She is the author of 3 full-length collections of poetry: Ground, Wind, This Body, We Are Meant to Carry Water, a collaboration with 2 other New Mexico poets, and A Guide to Tongue-Tie Surgery. Her chapbook, Obsidian, will be published by Dancing Girl Press in late 2023. And when Tina comes up, she's actually going to show you the 2 books that is on sale for 20% off that you can only get on this reading this evening. Without further ado, Tina Carlson.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you so much. Thanks to CavanKerry Press. These are my 2 books that Dimitri is talking about. One is called Ground, Wind, This Body. I'll be reading a little bit from that one. And the other one is called A Guide to Tongue-Tie Surgery, which is just out last month. I am so grateful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Denise. I just want to say a little bit about how amazing her book is. I know you're going to hear it, but it's just stunning. I had the opportunity to read it this past week, and I am just completely blown away. So you are so lucky that you're going to get to hear, and I hope everyone gets a copy who doesn't already have one. I'm going to start reading from a guide to tongue-tie surgery. It's called that. If you know what tongue-tie surgery is, that's the surgery they often do on infants. They cut the little frenulum if it's tying the tongue too close to the bottom of the mouth so that the infant can latch. But it can also be done for adults to help them speak more clearly. And it's sort of a metaphor for finding voice, which this book seeks to speak about. Cigarette smoke and a blue Impala. My grandmother finds me dreaming again. You work too much, darling, she lilts. And the dream shifts to cigarette smoke and a blue Impala. She is driving me to the movies, and I am a prisoner on parole. You eating okay, darling? You in love? She takes a long drag, and we stop for some gin. I never know what my crimes are. My work makes me sink, I say. Too many people wanting pills to calm down. My grandmother grew up on a Texas horse ranch, and her stepfather was named Fate. She spent her young adulthood in a sanatorium, coughing up blood. Not much gets her down. Think of it this way, darling of mine. You just have to love them and they'll feel better. I inhale her smoke and calm down. There are so many flowers blooming in the road. My life of crime sits in the back seat now. My grandmother, transparent, throws me a kiss, and her Impala, blue as sky, drops me off in my bed. Thank you. I'm going to be reading memoir poems from both books, but in honor of Denise's book and her incredible memoir. But this book also contains poems that give voice to the dead, as that last one, the ancestors, to fairy tale characters like the Snow Queen has her say, Pegasus, some Greek mythological characters. There are some poems where inanimate objects speak love poems to each other, and an avalanche has her say as well in the book. Ghost Town on Iris Avenue. Those were days when roads fired up and brothers rammed their bikes into the door. Everything too hot to touch, and the fancy man with a red car, hair greased back slick, gave me a swim. Trees were left to their own devices, each mountain pressed against the other. Believe me when I say the full moon loosened the dressings on my mother's memories. All her mouths started talking at once. Comets flew through the shadow of warm moon. Wars were waged against wood, and fists made parents. There was a sky that never fell, but grew white as bandages. I want to say body, as if it matters. The town fell to its knees. Heaven turned to smoke in those ghost churches. I'm going to read a couple of poems from Ground Wind This Body. This is a book mostly about how war continues to live in the home after the battlefield has been left years ago, if the veteran receives no help. Perimeter of war. Our home eventually blew down. Stained planks shattered under the winds of his panic. We held our jackets high over our heads like bright sails and tried to fly away. He lived in the propane fumes of his van, trash collecting under its axled belly. Each day he called out to his enemies, hunkered behind those unkempt hedges. Yellow flowers dared to bloom on those greening branches at the perimeter of war, our homeless home. our small bodies airborne for only moments, sewn as we were to that darkening battlefield of our Father's mind. And our lives aloft. My brothers cook up an idea to live on the trampoline. They pole vault across the yard and jump from room to room in their bouncing home. Beds made of gunny sacks, dry cereal to eat. We jump and twirl and even flip through the day, our lives aloft. In the borders of night, our eyes are ponds. Everything is moisture and glistens. Sunflowers open then, waiting for moths. We sleep outside in the dark as crickets nod us to sleep. We dream our parents come to watch and sit hand in hand, celebrate the sheltering trees and their children lifted up and laughing. Thank you. The rest of the poems are going to be, again, from A Guide to Tongue-Tie Surgery. The Embassy of Silence. My mother fills paper boats with pastel mints, juice glasses with bourbon. The room shimmers with lit cigarettes. We watch the perfumed players sneak peeks, bet and bluff. Out back, my father beats hedges with rusted shears, says, "God damn shit ass." Glass is empty. My brother puts frozen peas on his bruises. My mother hums in her new blue party dress. Ladies praise her close to perfect white cake. We grew up in Colorado, and my father was in the war on the snow in the mountains, and every chance he got, he'd be in the mountains or in the snow. And this is a poem honoring his love of snow. My father prayed to the gods of snow, a white crown on his hand-hewn home. How the brown heat of that wood turned to glass, turned sacred and silent in the dripping dark. Unlike my mother, who loved thick books sandwiched in pews, hymns wafting through her thin ribs, her brow wet with sweat for the divine. A scientist died and said, "There is no God, just particles, animated, and the invisible." My father skied the mountains of his years, still wearing the wools of war, his face lit with the ice of his heaven. Couple more poems. I fled the dry lips of men. A howling at the door, and ash from St. Helens on the sill. Oh, I'm going to start over. So this is a poem from when I lived in Seattle. And during that time, one night, St. Helens blew. And when we woke in the morning, there was ash over everything. You couldn't even see out of the windshield of your car. There was ash over the whole city, much of the state, actually. I fled the dry lips of men. A howling at the door, and ash from St. Helens on the sill. Histology books were black with mold, photos of pink cells darkening. I did not own that body. I did not want the fish to stop swimming, the night to burn and keep blowing away. Blue dreams of drowning, the mountains hollowed out, rivers on fire. I would never give birth, so said my mother, thinning after so many births and boys. Her sweet poison, a portent of shelter. When I was a tree, she cut her initials in my trunk. The life in me grew its own sky. I fled the dry lips of men, the whiskered bite. Harriers dropped feathers in my shade. Bark gave way to hawk perch, to the certainty I would survive only if empty. My daughter would fly to me like a bird. Once steady in the traffic of clouds and ash, she would land in the silent crater of my hands. One more poem. Machu Picchu. Once I was a cottonwoods captain. Her split trunk cocoon, smooth as skin, barkless. My mates were bald boys and wild, dirty girls. We sailed across the bland fields to you, verdant beacon, cut glass spires of stone, my steep steps, my granite prayers. The ditches ran with fury. In night's splintered light, my father simmered. He chased us into trees where we set off again. Oh, clouds above the squall, over our own piney mountains, dry with baked dirt. We ate soup right out of the can, made maps in mud, rose to the occasion of you when we were able. Thank you so much.
Oh, Tina, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I'll beam you out and I'll beam you back in when it's time for a Q&A. We're gonna have so much to talk about. I appreciate the reading. Okay, so everyone, by the way, Tina Carlson, 2 books that she read from are on sale for 20% off during this reading with the coupon code 16 CavanKerry in all caps. Tamara will put that in the chat for you to peruse at some point in this reading. Also in the chats, I see that you are talking about the work, if you're compelled by something, if something moves you, please put it in the chat, because later on, whether it's in this reading or afterwards, these authors are going to hear these words. Now, without further ado, we are going to talk about this beautiful book right here, Italian Blood. Denise Tolan's work has been included in places such as the Penn Review, Atlas and Alice, Hobart, Lunch Ticket, and the Best Small Fictions 2018. Denise was a finalist for Best of the Net 2022, and both in 2019 and 2018 in the International Literary Awards Penelope Niven Prize in Nonfiction. Denise lives and writes in San Antonio, Texas. You can find out about her obsession with survivors and Moby Dick at www.denisetolan.com. Without further ado, please put your hands together virtually for Denise Tolan.
Virtually. Thank you, Dimitri, and thank you, Tina. Tina and I met in Ada, Oklahoma, at this wonderful, magical thing called Scissortail Creative Writing Festival. If any of you want to Google it and hop on board, it's an incredible thing to be at. I heard her words and was just immediately drawn to her. So thank you for agreeing to do this, Tina. It was beautiful. I also want to thank my family, my poor family. Bill, Andrew, and Claudia are here, and man, my friends are laughing because they know I am not easy. And they are so wonderful. So thank you guys for being here. And I really can't leave without thanking my CavanKerry family, Dimitri, Gabriel. You guys also know I'm a pretty anxious person, and Tamara, thank you so much for making this book all that it can be, all that it should have been, and just handling everything so perfectly. Thank you. And I think I saw Ito Romo out there. I want to thank Ito for writing the beautiful foreword for the book. It's a big ask to ask somebody to do that. And he's also been one of my biggest supporters and shoot straight with me kind of friends, and love him so much. So thank you. So I guess what I should start with, Dimitri and Gabriel, is I didn't realize until my book was finished and we were looking at the last minute things that it would come with a trigger warning, like a lot of trigger warnings. And I thought, wow, I wish that had happened at birth. I could have used some trigger warnings. So I just want to let you know that what I'm reading does contain violence, some reference to guns, just, a bunch of crap I hope none of you ever understand, but it's there. So just so you know. And we also very thoughtfully and kindly, Gabriel has a list of resources in the book. If anyone is struggling with any of these situations, let me know or look to someone else here. So the very first thing I'm going to read is the very shortest thing I've ever written. And it was the first thing I ever wrote when I started writing nonfiction. I thought I would ease into it when I was writing about my family. And it wasn't easy. I still think this is the piece that cuts the most deeply. So it's at the very end of the book, which doesn't mean anything except that it fit into that idea of echoes and the echoes of the past. So this is from a segment of fragments called A Very Short History of Abuse in 5 parts. And this is part 1, Lucky Star. I was the only one my father never hit. I asked my mother why. You were born under a lucky star, she said. Is that all I get from the star? I wondered. My sister couldn't help me with this puzzle because, like a modern day Jack and the Beanstalk, she traded all her memories for drugs. When I turned to my brother, he put his hand over the past as if it was a box of popcorn he would not share. Why bring up the bad stuff? He said. Why not think of the vacations we took instead? We had some fun then. He speaks something like the truth. One afternoon, I sat with my mother among a display of lawn furniture at a local garden shop. It was hot outside, and we were happy to find comfort beneath the shade of an umbrella marked down to $69.99. She was 81 years old. Do you hear the birds, Mom? She cocked her head. No, my hearing for that is gone. Her voice sounded sad. Then she perked up. But I remember how they sounded. Do-do-dee-dee-dee. I laughed. She laughed. People walking by sent smiles like cool cocktails to the table marked $179.99. It's so beautiful here, my mother said, as if we were at a resort. We are the only ones who remember, she said, looking to the horizon at an imaginary sea. You and me, we remember it all. I took her hand. She squeezed mine hard. I'm sorry, she said. They are all yours now. She would not live another 5 months. And she was right. I do remember. I remember every scream, every plea, every sound that pounded flesh can make. And even though nothing landed my way, I hold it all. Alone now. Lucky me. So there's that one. And then I picked another one. And this is from the very beginning of an essay that I wrote called Betrayed by Blood. And this is not from the very start. This is a little bit in, but the only thing that you probably need to know is I reference a place called the Squirrel Cage, and I'm old. And back then, I think it was what they'd call like a go-go dancing place, where girls would dance in cages and they were almost naked. That was on the sign. So I referenced that. And then because of some of the descriptions, you might think we were younger, but I was 12, almost 13, and my brother was 9. So I don't know if you do need to know that. So here's Betrayed by Blood. My brother and I sat in the bedroom we shared, listening to my mother plead with my father to calm down. They were in their bedroom with the door shut, which was never a good sign. Occasionally we heard a slap or a fall or a sharp cry. We didn't look at each other though, only at the Mickey Mouse rug beneath our feet. Our mother found the rug at a garage sale. She was always looking for ways to make our room look like the kind of room American kids would have. The Mickey on our rug was dancing in a tux and tails. He had a magic wand in his hand. When I got out of bed, I always tried to step hard on the wand. For me, the rug was a reminder of all we would never be, the kind of kids who could believe in magic. When their bedroom door finally opened, my mother came straight into our room. She was wearing a light blue robe. There were drops of blood around her collar, like she had sewn tiny roses around the neckline. Her right eye was already swollen. "Let's go," she said, reaching for my brother's hand. He was 9 and skinny, like something that could easily be broken in a move. "Now," my mother said, looking at me and pulling my brother toward the door. I followed. The 3 of us ran down the 2 flights of stairs in harmony, as if we had trained for this event. When we pushed open the hall door, a neighbor opened her door, then quickly shut it. Outside, the cool air surprised me. My pajamas were light cotton. My brother had on short pajama bottoms and tube socks with green stripes. I was barefoot. It had been warm when we dressed for bed. "Hurry," my mother said. "Andiamo," she said again, as if those words were magic carpets that might make us move faster. I tried to run without stepping on loose rocks or tabs from soda cans. Once we ran past the porch lights, I was glad for the dark so I wouldn't see what my feet were headed for. I followed my mother's robe as she ran toward Austin Highway. When we got to the highway, she abruptly stopped and held her arms out to each side like a human cross. It was as if we stood on a precipice. The wind and noise from the cars sounded like an ocean far below us. My mother looked to her right, toward Austin, then ran to the left, down the busy side of the road. We ran past tattoo parlors and bars and motels that seemed abandoned, but weren't. I finally saw the shopping center where my mother must have known she'd find a phone booth in safety. The Piggly Wiggly was already closed for the night, but inside the store, employees were sweeping up and stocking shelves. I looked at the 3 of us and wondered if someone would call the cops. No one did. My mother picked up the payphone and dialed 0 for operator. "I want to make a collect call," she said, giving the operator a number. "Marie," she said a few seconds later, "I need help." It didn't take long for Marie's husband, Carlo, to arrive. He was a short, chubby Sicilian man with a thick head of hair he would keep well into his 80s. "Vali," he said, hugging my mom. "Let's go, huh? Hi, kids. Go ahead and get in the car." We slid into his massive Cadillac. As Carlo drove toward his house, I looked out the window and watched the neighborhood change, like I was a character in one of those movies where people's fortunes rapidly shift. As we crossed under Interstate 35, lighted coffee shops began to appear, along with gas stations and restaurants and fancy furniture stores. When we got to the corner full of churches, I knew we were almost there. This wasn't our first late-night visit to the Presti house, and it wouldn't be the last. In the driveway, I saw the curtains in the front window open a bit. We walked to the front door, and Marie opened it wide. "Entrate," she said, leading us all gently by the shoulder, like refugees you see on the news at night. "Hey," I heard from down the hallway. I followed the voice and went into Nina's room. She was 2 years older than I was, beautiful and thin, with a car she couldn't even drive yet waiting for her in the garage. "Same old, same old?" "Yep," I said. Nina sat back in her canopy bed and patted the other side. The whole room was white and lavender and gold, like something I figured French aristocrats set up for their daughters. "So what's new?" she asked. "I tried on some go-go boots the other day." "What?" she said, stopping in mid-yawn. "Where?" "Solo serve. My mom was busy in the dressing room." "Over the knee," I said, showing her where the boots had hit my thigh. "Heels?" "No," I said, suddenly disappointed in my choice. I mean, little block ones. I guess that's easier to dance in, right? At the squirrel cage, those boots are the first part of the job interview. Boots, check. Boobs, check. You're hired. We laughed, then talked about some friends we knew until she fell asleep. It was good to feel normal, like this was any other sleepover with a friend. I had known Nina my whole life. Our mothers met in Europe when we were babies. Both husbands joined the military and ended up in San Antonio, even though Carlo was an officer and my father was not. We never talked about that difference or any of the other ones. While Nina slept, I planned. I figured if I babysat every weekend for a month, I could buy the go-go boots. My breasts were already larger than most girls my age. Maybe, with makeup, I could get a job at the squirrel cage. Maybe I could make enough money that we could leave my father behind. The next morning, Carlo drove us home. My brother and I got ready for school. My mother cooked breakfast. Their bedroom door stayed shut. It wasn't easy to concentrate in class that day. During lunch, I took my sandwich to the library, ate it in the bathroom, then grabbed a study table and planned. I wrote down the following: money, $32 saved in the bank. Boots, $29.99. $40, possible babysitting money for weekends through March. And then I added a category, $40, question mark, gun. In the light of day, I'd realized that getting a job wasn't going to be enough to save us. Over the years, I'd heard my father threaten to kill my mother if she ever left him. Sometimes he even said he'd kill us kids first, then leave her alive so she would have to live knowing we were dead because of her. There was no simple getting away from him. We would live in fear as long as he was alive. I was willing to fix that.
Oh,
No, I wish I had something happy to end with, but it did. I ended up with this amazing family and these great friends, but yeah, it sucked.
Denise, Denise, oh, beautiful.
Thank you.
So, and it's like there's a subliminal beauty in needing to write through these processes in order to both reckon with it, and also settle on where we need to be in ourselves with something like this. And I love that you are in the stage where you're able to write this and now let people listen. I actually want to start with this question first, and I'll invite Tina also to our little our Q&A session that we're entering. And you just this book was so powerful, especially because I read the earlier version of it, and then I was able to spend time over the weekend reading it again in its full completion. And I'm remembering why I wanted to say yes to it so bad, right? And I needed to hear some of these stories. And I'm sure that a lot of people, whether it's lowercase or capital T trauma, have experienced some of this in their family. And now when they pick this up, they're going to be able to kind of start their own reckoning with this. So I wonder if you've actually thought about that while you were sitting in different workshops, and then you were sitting with this work too, of what it was going to mean to actually tell your story and put it out so others were going to be able to receive it.
I don't think I was at first. I think this was survival. I think I had to get this out of the way before I could write much else.
Mm,
Only then did I think the feeling of aloneness that you have growing up when you realize your family is different and you want to hide all of this. No one ever said anything like this to me. In the next part of that essay, I say, I remember watching an episode of Maude, B. Arthur. Anybody remember Maude?
mhm,
Where Arthur hits her. And it was like a revelation for me that maybe I wasn't alone. And so I thought about that as the writing went on, but at first it was just swimming to the surface.
mhm. To follow up on that, Denise, when did you start saying, okay, I'm going to be able to write about this? I mean, I assumed with some of the other stuff that you've published, you were writing at other spots in your life first. So when did you decide that you were able to finally dig back into these kind of memories?
It was definitely after my mom died. I thought, I can't sit here with all of this inside of me alone. I really can't, and have nobody to to I just couldn't. It was too much. So I started putting it on paper little by little, just to get it out of
Mhm.
me, and that felt better. So yeah, I don't think I could have done it while my mom was still alive.
Mhm.
Um, I just don't. I don't think I would have wanted to expose her that way, because
Right.
that was my role in the family. I was the savior, the kid that was going to take care of everything.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that was, I think, the moment for me.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And that's the interesting thing too when we're writing, whether it's fiction, whether it's creative nonfiction, poetry that has a level of fiction and truth in it. It's interesting to navigate that distancing of the work to those others around us, especially when we're writing from those instances where we're talking about these people that are close to us. So I can see why you needed that sort of time. Um,
I didn't realize I could do that.
Yeah, and just give me one second. And yeah, so actually I'm thinking about how this distance also goes into the way that the work becomes performative, like when you're reading the work, but then you're able to perform it. And I know you also mentioned that you had a theater background as well, and that is mentioned a little bit there. And Tina, I'm also going to tag you in because this pairing was quite interesting because I think and this is something that we were talking about before everyone else came on. If it's okay for me to mention it, Denise, that you were a little like nervous to come on and do the
Mm,
reading. I think we all have some of that in us when we're about to read, or even if you're teaching or you have to deliver a presentation or even write an email. I think a lot of authors often talk amongst themselves and with their students about how we gain confidence in front of others when we have to read this. And both of you, in varying ways, have a kind of distance in your writing where you're able to kind of see everything that's going on through that trauma. And both of you have such great reading voices and great pacing, and you're able to tell us just enough between poems. So I want to ask both of you, Tina and Denise, how do you navigate being able to read this work in front of others? And did it come naturally, or is this something that also took time for you to get used to? Maybe Tina, you want to go first?
Okay, yeah. No, this does not come natural. I did not study theater. I'm a nurse, so I am not good at public speaking, and I've had to practice a lot. Um, but I think so, yeah, a lot of practice. One thing that helps me, my safe person was my grandmother. So when I start the poem, when I start the reading, I've done this in a few readings with my grandmother, I just feel her presence and that calms me down. I also suck on these rescue remedy things, but I can I felt pretty calm today because I was working, but then as it got closer, I could feel my heart doing this. And I just thought, that's just part of it. You're just going to be nervous. Um, the other thing that helps me a lot is, I mean, just looking out at the faces, at the kind faces, people don't come to these readings to put us down or criticize us. And usually they're the kindest people in the world that come to these readings, right? So I just try and remember that people are here supporting us. And today I especially felt excited because I wanted to hear my friend Denise read her incredible book. So there's something in the collaboration that makes it safer as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Tina.
I think you guys do a really good job pairing authors, because I needed Tina, and it's hard. I think it's easier for me to read something else. Um, and I'll have friends here who I was an actor with. That part's easy because I spent 90% of my life being somebody else. So nobody could see me. So it's only been the last few years since I wrote this that I can say, this is who I am. And I even asked my husband just a little while ago, what do you think people are going to think of me at the end of this? Like, am I going to look like a horrible person? I'm always worried,
Mm,
always worried. Um, but it's getting better when I do think I've gotten so many notes from people saying, I lived through this too, and thank you. So that makes a big difference. It really does. But you just never know. It's hard stripping yourself and saying things that are ugly.
yeah, yeah. And it's it's almost like a paradox, right? Because I think as writers or just as people that are thinking about these things, we kind of know that everyone has these ugly parts, right? And it's just because these are things we just don't talk about in an elevator with a random person.
No.
But there is something about like community, right? Like Tina mentioned safety and a safe person, and pairing our authors. We try to do a really good job with pairing our authors with colleagues or people that they want to read with or they share some sort of experience with. And it's wonderful that both of you have had community together. And community is something that's really important. It's something that we try to kind of model with the CavanKerry Press, like administrators or like staff people, and then working with our authors to really try to get these books to completion, and then working with lovely people like Tina. So let's talk about like community and safety people. What is the importance of being like in these writers groups or like these theater troops? What is it about just geeking out about writing with one another and kind of understanding each other on that different level that really helps us get from a draft to a finished product?
Go ahead, Denise.
I just think if I just, it took me a long time to enter communities. That's just the truth from growing up. But what I like when I do enter a community, I see people, don't see them, but I've seen their names that were with me during my MFA program, which my son got me to come into through Macondo. Um, some of my mentors through my program, like Allison, who just gave me a heart, and Janetta. And I think Tina's right. When you find people who make you feel safe using your voice and you feel safe digging deep. And even if it's not um, coming out perfectly, they'll help you tailor it and you feel safe in that too. So
Mhm.
I think a community is everything, everything, developing a community, but it's got to be a community where you feel accepted and held and you can trust.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Denise.
Yeah, I think especially with material like this, um, that's not supposed to be spoken aloud, it's great to find colleagues, co-conspirators, um, other writers that are supportive and also taking risks in their writing. And it gives me a lot of courage to be part of a
Mhm.
community.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that, ladies. So here's a question from the chat from Max. Denise, since publishing these two pieces of work as well as the book, have there been any readers who have reached out to you to let you know that they have gone through the same struggle that you have, especially in the Italian community?
You know, it's hard in the Italian community because you're not supposed to say anything.
Mm,
You're just not, especially if it's the father. Um, and I was telling some friends of mine, I was really worried. My mother's sisters I have one cousin. And I was worried that she was going to join from Europe. Fortunately, her English isn't great, but I know she's going to be sad that it happened and sad that I spoke. Both. So I don't know. That's hard. I was really, no one ever talked about that and no one ever does still. I think that's just family is everything and you keep secrets in the family for life.
mm,
But I've had a lot of other people who have come to me and said, thank you for putting this out there. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, I don't think I have had anybody from my mother's friends have daughters who have been hesitantly like, good luck. But I don't think they're like, no, I don't think it's something that it's still okay to do.
right, right. And I would even motion to say that not even just in the Italian community, in a lot of other communities in general, there is kind of like there's an unspoken rule, right? It's kind of like a family code to not talk about certain things with
Mhm.
others. And I wouldn't be surprised if more people come out and say, in a direct message like I did to you over this weekend, that, hey, I share in common some of these experiences, and thank you for writing it because I needed to hear it. So thank you for that. We got a question from Tamara for you both. You both write so beautifully and powerfully about trauma. How does the process of chronicling the abuse hurt and heal and morph these projects and yourselves? So I think I read that a little wrong. Let me know if I need to read it again or paraphrase. Do you feel like you got it?
Tina, go.
How does the process hurt and heal? Is that what it was?
The abuse and the hurt. How does it heal and morph these projects in yourself?
Oh,
Writing through.
that's such a great question. I'm loving the question.
Mm.
Um, well, it's everything. It's kind of what Denise said much better than I ever could. I'm so appreciative of hearing your answers, Denise. I, like Denise, don't even think I believed myself until I wrote it. I think a lot of my history was secret from myself. It wasn't just I was keeping it from others. I kind of knew it was there, and I had done a lot of therapy work, but I didn't believe it. I just thought, I'm crazy. This didn't really happen, or it wasn't that bad. And I just need to shut up and support everybody else. And I got really sick physically. Really, my body is what made me write it. I couldn't live in a body that didn't tell the truth. And really, it was since writing that first book that I read from that I started to feel like I was real, that I was a real human being, and then I had something to offer the world, and I had something to say. And if that isn't healing, I mean, what a great question. Um, and then to read it out loud to others and not have people go screaming out of the room or say, oh, you're just a fraud, you made that up.
Mm.
My siblings still, most of them do say that I'm a fraud, and I made that up, by the way. But they're dealing with things their own way. But and I love them very much. But it's just what Denise said. I'm breaking a lot of rules to speak out.
Mm.
Your turn, Denise.
No, but I think Tina's right too. You look around at your family, and my sister died very young of drugs, because of the trauma, I believe, that she couldn't deal with. My brother runs away from everything, and it will. I have another essay in the book about things that go boom. After my father died, I had everything in my body explode. I think the further you pack things down, the sicker it makes you. And so part of health means you have to get this out. And I think that's what's important. So at some point, you begin to believe in the power of your writing for you, first and foremost.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's it actually makes me think of something aside from writing, but it is very adjacent and connected. And the idea that, how like our own ideas and our own outlooks on things could get us sick, right? You can actually develop illnesses from not being able to take out something that should be something that is very like uh I guess like ethereal. It's just a thought, it's just a concept, but it becomes material and then it exists in you. And I think there is something about writing, and a lot of people say meditating, you could do that with journaling. I think all of this kind of is that one process of actually getting these ideas down. And you're right, a bunch of people have different ways of trying to work this out, to release, right? Which goes to a question from our friend Jonathan in the chat. Denise, now that you have been able to put this memoir out, do you think you are released to write fiction, or is there more for you to write about in terms of memoir?
Both. I mean, I think I've always written fiction, and I love writing fiction, but I needed to get this out. And um, I also want to write a little bit more about the beautiful relationship I had with my mother, in
Mm.
spite of all the pain. Um, she's the only reason that a lot of us survived as long as we did. And she taught me a lot. And so I want to do that too. I want to give her a gift and give myself a gift because there was a lot of beauty there. So yeah, I still think I have a lot of both to write.
Mm, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And hopefully, because this was something that I was very captivated about with reading your book. And it's what you started with, a very short history of abuse. I think it was such a well done hybrid piece. And it was such a great way to end the book because in terms of form, the way it was fragmented was so different than the rest of the book. And as the poet, it kind of read as a poem to me. I was like, oh yes, she has it in there. So maybe if you could talk a bit about your process, about this being the first piece of memoir that actually helped you enter into the fold of being able to write something that was longer and prosy. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Tina. Um,
Yay.
yeah, it's gorgeous. So if you could talk a little bit about that process and maybe what you think the form did for you to help you go and write those other pieces.
I think the main thing I needed to do was write something. I thought the shorter I could write it, just to put my feet in the water, I would see how it felt. And I think told you, to me, this was the hardest piece I wrote. And it's the one that still stings the most.
Mhm.
But I liked the fragmented idea because I didn't go into it saying, I'm gonna do this. I said, I'm going to go into it and let's see what happens. So I didn't really have a form that I had to adhere to, and I didn't really have an end that I was trying to get to. I just had something that I wanted to say.
Mhm.
And so it made it a little bit easier. I didn't have any expectations. Um, and I think a lot of times when I write, if I'm not doing that, what I try to do is remember how something smelled or how something felt when I sat in it, or how cold it was when that happened, and then right around that sensory feeling. I like very much to do that. With my mom, it's always going to be the smell of cooking, always, that will bring me to her in a memory. So I
Yeah.
don't know, my process is I just write my way out of it usually, or into it, who knows.
It's really cool. It's kind of like a sensory object exercise, right?
Hmm.
And I think Richard Blanco actually calls it the arroz con pollo effect. That
Yes.
no matter who you are in the world, right? If you mention a certain type of dish, someone is going to connect some dish that meant a lot to them. It might be from a moment, it might be from a glimpse in their life, but they'll link something to it. And I think that's very poignant because in each one of your essays or each one of your memoir pieces, we're linked to a certain moment, right? Like there's the go-go boot, there's the rug. We're just linked to something there. That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you. Gabe does have a question for Tina. Tina, you have a very admirable ability of capturing little moments in these beautiful, glimmering images that open up into personal, intimate revelations. How do you identify these images and objects in the world that turn them into poetry?
Wow. I love these questions coming in, such thoughtful questions. I think it's kind of like what Denise said. I mean, I hate to keep saying what Denise said, but she's so articulate about this stuff. I think that is how you do it. I
Mhm.
think it's the very images, the images for me of childhood and the past are still very poignant.
Mhm.
I lived outdoors. If you could remember the Machu Picchu, we were sort of feral actually, and we lived outdoors, and that was our saving grace. And so those images um, are what live in me probably more deeply than the trauma.
Mm.
And those are what I love to write about. And then those are how I'm embodied in a body, which is a big deal for me to be embodied. And I think it is the very images that then, like Denise said, will bring us to the sort of the kernels of some of the harder truths that happened at the same time. But in some ways, they're cloaked in these images, which are life-saving, really, and so powerful. And I'll always be grateful for that. Um, Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Gabe.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to all of you. And thank you everyone that's here. We are wrapping up. I do got one follow-up question for this, and then one that I usually try to end on for our authors. And it's interesting because we're talking about these sensory object lessons or these object exercises. And then we're talking about these certain moments that are really poignant and vivid in your mind. And Gabe's follow-up question was, how do these focal points help you anchor yourself on the page and build such tremendous experiences for your readers? And I feel like both of you started talking about that a bit. And I think the great word there is anchor, right? I think when we want to write from a certain spot, as Denise said, and then write yourself around it, you have to anchor yourself to a certain memory. Now, I love these readings because we leave them on afterwards on YouTube for people to use as resources. And sometimes we do get emerging writers and new authors that come to these looking for certain advice. What would you suggest, or what is your usual manner and how you start at an anchored image? And then you start working your way out of this image. So like Denise, on a common day where you've been washing the dishes and all of a sudden you know this one thing that's been just like on your writer mind, and you're like, okay, now I got to sit down and write this down. How do you start writing around that thing to create a narrative?
I think, like, I just wrote an essay. I had posted a picture of my family, of my father, on Facebook in conjunction with Italian Blood. And a friend of mine from high school said, I was always so afraid of your father, and we never did get to swim in that pool.
Mm,
And I had this sudden memory, and you can read about that, but we did have an almost pool in our backyard that was never completed and turned into a big hole. And
mm,
it stayed there for 40 something years. And we never even thought of it as a pool anymore. And so I wrote from the bottom of that pool. I wanted to remember, when did I stop thinking of this as a pool? And
mm,
that was how I sometimes come to things, is I'll physically try to go back to that space and remember, where was I when I was thinking this the last time? When was the last time I thought of this as a pool, and why did I stop? So those are usually just the kind of things I'll think about. I try to go back there and remember, what did it look like? What did it feel like? What was the emotion like? Instead of, I don't have an end. I'm just trying to write myself through the remembrance, if that makes sense.
yeah, that's great. Thank you, Denise. Tina?
Yeah, I love that. I guess what I would add to that, in the book I read, A Guide to Tongue-Tie Surgery, there are a lot of persona poems, and sometimes I'll go at it that way. Like for Denise's example, I'd write something as the pool. I'd write
Mm.
from the perspective of the pool. And sometimes just getting out of my own self and feeling like I, Tina, have to write something about the pool. I'll write from the pool itself, and that will open it up in a different way as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I gotta say, Tina, I use that too. The persona cheat code is what I call it. You know, this is right. There's just something about, and I think we talked about that at the beginning of the Q&A. I think we started with the idea of distancing ourselves and then distancing our family from the work and then seeing the work for what it is. Yeah, sometimes that the distance, like projecting yourself onto another object, that object lesson, that really does help. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for being here this evening. And thank you so much to Denise and Tina. This is the final question that I usually try to end on. Um, what writer advice would you give to your 25-year-old Denise and Tina? What writer advice would you give to that 25-year-old self?
That's a hard one, because sometimes I'm pissed about that. I feel like everything that I went through made me start the race 15 years late, and I get mad. I think I would just go back and say, you gotta work your way through it however you can. Nobody can tell you when it's time, but when it's time, listen to that little itch inside your head and just do it. And even if you think people are going to be mad, or think you're crazy, or think, they don't want to look at you anymore because it's depressing, just do it, because you have to get it out. So just do it. start small.
Yeah. Thanks, Denise.
Yeah, I'd say write what's really most important to you. Don't worry about what other people think. And you've got it. You've got what you need. Be brave.
Thank you. Just do it and be brave. You got what you need. Personally, I fell in love with you two as people tonight, as well as on the page. So thank you so much for this conversation. That's why I love having these conversations with folks. Yeah, please, everyone, give yourselves a round of applause for Denise and Tina and yourself for staying up. If you're on the East Coast at 9 o'clock at night, or a little earlier if you're a little farther out west. Gabe or Tamara, at this time, you could get everyone off mute so everyone could get a chance to hear their lovely applauses, and good night and farewell.
Thank you.
Woohoo!
Thank you.
Yay!
Wonderful.
Oh,
Good night.
Great
gorgeous.
job.